Hello and welcome to part 3 of the TCS guide. In this episode, we'll be covering fulfilling your resources and basically dealing with the management of these resources. Whether it's including trading, production of the resources, prospecting for energy resources, or otherwise this is going to be a catch-all for all of them. So yeah, enjoy. In moving on to the energy resources systems in TCS, we'll start over here in the oil tab. This tab is near enough identical to the coal tab, so I won't go into depth on the coal tab when we go over to that, but essentially you can see all the production numbers, all the consumption numbers that you have, and then your surplus, deficit, and your potential increase in production. Now this confuses people a lot of the time, but for example, if we go down, Russia, it says they have a 0 surplus, but that is inaccurate. They have a near 5 million surplus, as we can see here. It's just they're not using their entire surplus. So your surplus reflects how much you are pulling out of the ground each year. So we can see Bulgaria is pulling out more than they need to, so is Guatemala, so is Ethiopia. Whereas Russia is not pulling it out of the ground when it doesn't have a place to put it. If Russia, for example, was to invest in some storage, say that, then it will increase their amount produced, lowering this potential increase. If we want to invest maybe 5 million into here, you'll see we now have a deficit because it started to produce all the ones it can produce and it can no longer produce any more than it already is. Alternatively, instead of storing it, they could trade this oil away. They could start using more oil for something, and other things. So essentially, this is your surplus, this is your deficit, or the amount you are producing more than the amount you are overproducing. This shows how much you're importing, exporting. Russia is an exporter. The US is an importer currently, apparently. And down here you can see the global deficit or surplus. There's a mass deficit right now. Probably needs to be looked into, whether by the players or by admins. But regardless, so that's why so many people are without oil in this world right now. Probably largely impacted by the fact there's a major war going on and everyone's inflated their military sizes. Over here, we have production efficiency. So this is how many reserves you've found. Conventional being the easier to extract, cheaper reserves. Unconventional just being the harder, more expensive ones. And based upon that, it determines how many you can produce a year. So we can see the conventional production cap. This is the maximum amount you can produce each year. It is affected by this, and it is affected by your extraction efficiency. So if you have a 500% extraction efficiency, you can produce way more than you currently can. This can be invested into here, as we can see. It costs money, as you can see there, to invest into that. And it's very expensive, but it can be worth it long term to get your efficiency up there. Over here you have your production. You can change this if you want. You could say you want to produce only 2 million, and now the US has a massive deficit. You could say you want to produce up to this cap, or you can leave it with the formula it currently has in, which I would advise. It's almost always the best case. Because it automatically handles it. And you can, over here, as we mentioned before, store oil. So you can invest money into constructing oil deposits, and then you can choose like oil storage silos or whatever you'd want to call them. And then over here, you would input oil per year into your storage. It cannot exceed your capacity. If you try to exceed your capacity, it would simply max out and you'll be investing it for no reason. So yeah, that in general covers how you'd manage this tab. It was a bit, I know I went over it quite quick, but it is quite a simple tab to get your hands on. Almost everything that applies there applies in the coal tab, as you can see. Just a few different values that you can read here. And synthetic consumption I completely ignore early game, because the synthetic fuel system isn't active in the early game. And later down the line there's a natural gas and a nuclear energy tab, which both operate the same as this one. with some differences. Moving on to energy interface. Now this might look a bit confusing. This is how much energy your population actually requires to keep their lights on, for example, and everything. And that shows what it's going to be next year. This is based upon your GDP size, among other things. And this shows how much you're currently supplying of that demand. And you can import and export energy later in the game. I don't believe it's a thing this early in the season. But then over here, you can see what you are satisfying your energy with. So right now, coal is like the only option. You have coal, and you have some really inefficient, ineffective, renewable energy sources. But like Japan, for example, they've got 2.99% of their energy is covered by renewable energy. Greece, 8%. It can be pretty effective to invest in this in the long term. However, it's also quite expensive to do it early on. Other than coal, you could have natural gas and nuclear power. They come in later of the season. And basically this just affects what your coal consumption is. Moving on to energy companies. This is where you manage what your future of your energy resources are. For example, over here you have your monetary assets. This is just how much money your energy company currently has. If it's negative, that's a bad thing. You need to get it up. But other than that, this is a pool of money that you can withdraw from into your EMR, your treasury, your emergency monetary reserve. But this is also the money that you use to spend into oil and coal prospecting. This money goes towards increasing the amount you discover so that next year you can produce more of the thing. You can see in the oil tab, if we go to the US, they're spending like 900 million. They will have an 11% increase in their production next year. They will have discovered 7.3 billion barrels of oil in the ground, compared to 6.6. And that's from spending this amount. That is causing them to go in a deficit, and they will have far less monetary assets next year. And that is simply because of the fact that this is an unprofitable thing. Unless you're exporting, at which point then the money that you are getting from exports, you want to go to the budget tab and invest into energy stimulus. This is money going directly into your energy company so that you can use that money. As you can see here, you invest into the company and then you use the money they're investing. So Canada's got that much going into oil. If we looked at Canada down here, they've got an 8% jump in their production next year. Hope that makes sense. I find these tabs a bit, hard to explain in detail. Employees just affect your workforce and how much you're paying. Salaries, same thing. This is the total amount of money you're spending on these things. This shows what income you make from these. As you can see, it's currently unprofitable. That is because income is based upon how much you are consuming. So you don't make income from making a surplus or exporting, unless you make the income, obviously, in trade agreements. And then this just shows how much you're producing of each of the things. So there you are. I guess that's all the information I can really cover here. So yeah, I'll move on now to how you can actually engage in trading. To start off, we'll be in the resource tab. This is where every year you'll have to drop into this tab, and it will only take a minor bit of work each year, but it is one of the most important things to do each year, because if you don't do it, then your GDP growth really suffers as a consequence. And if it wasn't obvious already in this series, GDP growth is quite possibly the most important factor of the sheet side of TCS. If you're not growing in your economy, then you either need a very good reason why that's worth it, or you're doing something wrong. So anyway, the resources tab makes up one of the most, if not the most, largest GDP growth effect. And so it is very important that you get it done early on. Straight away, you can see here, this is how many workforce is being used already by your resource production industry, and then the amount of workers that you could possibly use. Mexico has a huge amount of their workforce used, and we'll go through and see if that's being used correctly. Here you can just see how many are available. This is a quick little way of looking at it. It's informative. It's self-explanatory. Sorry. Coming over here to internal market data. Don't know about that name for it. I don't know if it's data as much as it's just information. But so this is the amount you are spending on resource production. Sales tax impacts the amount of dissent. If you remember from the population tab, the amount of dissent that you get from the resources tab, but it also reduces the amount of resources consumed and increases the amount of money into your pocket. Worker's wage impacts how effective each individual worker is. It can at most be 3 times the average wage, and it's effectively what determines how much your resources cost as well. And then this information is just, well, trade balance, how much you make or lose from trading your resources, and domestic purchases impact the sales tax you gain. Coming over here to land management, this is effectively self-contained. It does the work itself. Just if you go into the land area tab and you appropriate more land for food, you'll have less land used for farming and mining and logging. Also, not farming, mining and logging. And if you use workers in the food industry, that will also use up your workers for in resource production. Coming over here to the raw materials, we're actually going to skip over this. We're going to skip over manufactured, we're going to skip over electronic, and we're going to go straight to luxury. And the reason for this is because you need to work from right to left. Because if you look, if I produce more luxury goods, then I start consuming more manufactured goods than if I am not. So producing it increases the amount of manufactured goods we use, and manufactured goods increase the amount of raw materials we use, and so you want to work from right to left so that you're not confusing anything. As otherwise you'd work all the way over to the right, and then the thing at the left will no longer be valid. So we're fulfilling our luxury goods need. This is how much you're producing, this is how many you consume, this is how much you are trading, 0, and this is how much money you're making from the trade, this is how much it costs you, this is how much it costs you to produce when you factor in the manufactured goods needed, and this is how much it costs to produce when you don't factor that in. So you can determine whether or not it's worth it to import from someone who gets it cheaper. For example, India gets it for like half the price that Mexico does. And workforce is how you affect this. So as you can see, we've got a 4,000 surplus. That is ideal. If we increase the amount of workforce, we have a bigger surplus. Surpluses are useless unless you're trading them. So getting a close to 0 surplus or trading out your surplus is best practice. If we go over here to electronic goods, we have a massive surplus and we're not trading it out. So now either we would go and offer this to somebody who doesn't have a massive surplus. For example, we could offer to Britain, since they're in a deficit. We could offer to Portugal, which is an AI nation, so you'd have to ping a AI GM. We could offer to anyone with a negative amount, and effectively they just pay for your resources that you're producing. In this case, I would probably just lower the amount of workers we have on it, since we've got a bit of a strain for how many workers we have. So that's too low. 6,000, 7,000, 8,000, and now we have a minor surplus, and it just freed up like several tens of thousands of men. Over here we have manufactured goods. Like I say, this goes into electronic and luxury goods, and we've now reduced the amount we need to consume. It was at 3.2 million, I believe. Now it's at 2 million, so that is ideal for us. So we can cut down the amount we're putting into it by a lot. So just experiment until it's at a number that seems reasonable to you. Maybe we could drop down a little bit there, drop down a bit more, and they'll leave it there. 11,000 surplus, absolutely fine. We're now at 200,000 unused workforce. We were at, I believe, 60,000 at the start or something. Now we move over to raw materials, and we have a 9 million surplus. We are actually trading some of this out, so we could offer it around. There are people who would accept it. Like the US spends $2 compared to our 36 cents, so we could offer it to the US and tell them to stop producing as much, and they could decide whether that's worth it. We could offer it to the UK, who's in a deficit currently. There are a few options, but just for this example's sake, we'll cover how to actually get trade deals in the future. Just for this example's sake, we'll just make sure everything is producing as effectively as we can get it. And it can be quite a large impact, the smallest little change, when handling raw materials. See there, goes from 1.8 million deficit to 500,000 deficit to 600,000 surplus. So let's go for 327, 328 should do it. There we are. Now we've got a surplus of around 167k. That's pretty reasonable, and we have a decent amount of unused workforce to put into it in the future. That's basically the gist of this tab. If we go to the GDP growth tab real quick, we can see from resources and trade as two separate values, we are getting a 2% boost to our GDP growth. That is rivaled only by our initiatives currently, which are very temporary. They can only last a maximum of 5 years. So this is by far our most beneficial growth modifier, the thing that's affecting our growth. We should still be at the same amount of growth as we was earlier, near enough. And we probably lowered our deficit a bit. I believe we got near 50 million before, so we're doing alright on that front. So that is how the resources tab works. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Once you get the hang of going from the right to the left. It also seems that our manufactured needs has went down a lot. That is likely due to the fact that we would have been having infrastructure problems before. When we get around to a video on infrastructure, I will explain how you can detect and resolve one of those problems, but that means we can actually lower both of these a fair bit because they are higher than they need to be. Can we get away with 2? No. Okay. Now if we scroll over, we're looking good on all resources. We can even lower these because of the infrastructure problem. So yeah, infrastructure problems are basically you don't have enough infrastructure and it increases the price to produce, which means it's sometimes better to reduce everything across the board so then everything can compete a bit better. So it can be just a result of having handled your workforce badly in the first place, causing overproduction to become an issue, which is what was the issue here, or it could just be that you've not got enough infrastructure in the first place to cover your needs. But like I say, I'll cover that in depth once we get to the infrastructure video in a few videos' time. That's all for the resources tab though. We'll be moving on to the energy stuff right now. So if you want to trade in TCS, you can trade any of these items that you see here. Fishing boats, natural gas, electricity itself, grain, raw materials, fish. All of these can be traded. To trade, this trade data tab that we are in shows you the average value, also known as the market value of the product. This is how much money, how much it normally costs to purchase this, or how much you'd get from selling this, based upon the current market. This shows you the total amount being traded in value. This shows the total amount being traded in tonnage or barrels or BOE, whatever thing you're looking at, or how many boats or how many ships. And this is just a pure data tab so that you can make informed decisions. If we go to the trade agreements tab, this is where you actually engage in trade. As we can see here, Morocco, or the Alawi dynasty, is importing fruit and vegetables in an amount of 180,000 tons. Also, they're exporting fruit and vegetables, 180,000 tons for $10 per ton to the United Kingdom until 1900 via ship. Now this can be via road, rail, ship, power grid or pipeline. Road and rail, you must share a land border with the nation. Ship, you can do with anyone, even if they're landlocked, as long as they have some rights to some river that gets them out of their country, such as Switzerland having the Rhine they're allowed to use. A power grid, you must share a power grid with the nation, which is a late season thing. And same with pipeline, you must share a pipeline with the nation to get gas or oil to that nation. If we scroll down, we can see how you actually create a trade agreement. You go down to the bottom here where it's empty, and you just fill in the information. Say Austria wants to export some fish in the amount of 100,000 at $2 per fish to Ecuador until 1953 via ship. There we are. It'd be a value of 200,000 going between them each year, and it just sits on the trade agreements tab and then automatically takes effect. That is how simple that is. That is how you trade. Now, importantly, along with this trade data, where you can see a market value, this is like the average people are willing to spend on these things, you can look towards the oil tab. It currently costs $1.75 to produce a single barrel of oil. That means that anyone selling oil on the market right now is currently selling at a loss. Now, the reason they are doing that is because sometimes selling at a loss can be valuable in boosting your GDP growth, although that isn't to say it isn't also valuable to do so while selling at a profit. I believe coal is also sold undervalued. Yep, $1.26. It's selling for 90 cents. So most of the nations who are exporting these aren't even making money, even though they very well could, because who else are they going to go to when they get a deficit of these resources? Like if we look at coal, there is actually a massive surplus of these resources, so these can be at low price. You look at oil, this should be a high price because there isn't enough oil in the world for everybody. There isn't enough to go around. Same applies to basically everything. Food and everything. You can get the value of the food itself in the food tab, how much you spend on the food. If we go to, say, what is the Alawi dynasty spending on fruit and veg? Well, they're spending $0, but they're also spending $31 because they are not subsidising it, but some private corporation is spending $31 on it. If you subsidised it, you'd be spending the full $31, and it would make it less viable to trade. Same with fishing boats and trade ships. In Dockyard Math, you can see the price per ship over at ship construction cost. And then a fishing boat, I believe, is a fifth of this value. So you can use that information. Basically, this is just how you determine whether or not a trade is worth doing. But I believe that is literally the extent of what I can give you regarding the trade system. There isn't much to it once you understand the basics of how to engage in a trade. I'll cover how to actually make a trade request in a later video I have planned. But yeah, that is it for now. I hope you've enjoyed this episode in the video. I hope it's been informative. Yeah, I hope that this is all going well for you. For now, goodbye.